Welcome back to the Stronger by Science podcast. I'm Greg Knuckles.
I'm Pak.
And I'm Milo.
And we have another and in many ways a final great episode for you guys today. If you didn't listen to the last episode of the podcast, I did have an announcement up top that this will be the final episode in the kind of like standard run of the podcast for the foreseeable future. That doesn't mean it's dead forever. Doesn't mean we might not pop into your feed with a random episode here or there at some point. But after this episode, the podcast is going on an indefinite hiatus. But announcement up top here. If you do just like getting Stronger by Science audio content, even though the podcast is going away, we're going to start doing a monthly audio Q&A for people on the newsletter. So if that is something that interests you, and you're not subscribed to the newsletter already, you can go to strongerbyscience.com/newsletter to sign up to the newsletter. And when those monthly Q&A episodes drop, you will be notified of it. And if you're not a newsletter subscriber already, and you're thinking like, I've signed up to a lot of newsletters and I think it's going to be cool, but for the most part, they're just spamming me with a bunch of ads and it's a waste of my time and clutters my inbox. That is not something you need to worry about with the Stronger by Science newsletter. It's literally like 95% plus just sending you informative content. So breaking down new studies, giving practical training tips. We're going to have the monthly audio Q&As. And then like maybe once or twice a year, if we're running a sale on coaching or running a sale on a product, we'll let you know about it. But like the ratio of just getting informative content to marketing related stuff, it really is like 10-1, 20-1, maybe even more. So yeah, it's good stuff. And if you'd like to continue getting audio content from us, check out the newsletter. So this is like I said on the last episode, this is going to be a Q&A episode. So a lot of y'all sent in questions and we're going to answer them here. So without further ado, do one of you guys want to kick us off?
I want to say a few final words before.
Oh yeah. Go for it.
Keep in mind, we are, I don't know what we are classed as, temporary guests, the permanent co-hosts or CEOs and CFOs, whatever you want to call us. But we were listeners of the podcast first and foremost. And for many years, this podcast was a big source of education for both myself and Milo. We looked forward to every episode on this podcast and other competing podcasts, but we all know that this was the first fitness podcast ever. And it's the end of an era. I want to say thank you, Greg, for rocking the podcast, because we've been rocking it alongside you for the past year or so, but for many years, this was an amazing source of information, entertainment, and a good companion on some dark days, and that was reflected also by many of the messages that came in. So in addition to the questions, a lot of people expressed their gratitude and stuff. But I want to thank you and Linz, and obviously Trex, who was a part of this before, but also thank the people that were listening, and big hug to everyone. It was a mixed sort of a goodbye message, but yeah, it's been emotional, man. Stronger by Science, awesome resource, awesome podcast, and long live SBS podcast, I guess. Hashtag free Todd Ralph.
Well, thanks, man. I really appreciate it. That means a lot.
Just to
And
echo Pak and make you feel even worse about this, since you hate compliments, I echo everything Pak says. If ever I was asked, hey, I want to learn more about lifting and fitness, where should I go? I would say the Strong by Science podcast. And although we won't be able to say it anymore, I do have faith that the monthly Q&A episodes will carry on the spirit of this podcast very well. So yeah, it's been very gratifying having the opportunity to be a part of this. And for one last time, let's get into some questions.
all right, starting with Frank.
Hey guys, first of all, I just want to say thank you for all of the incredible fitness content over the years. Been listening since the very beginning and haven't asked a question up until now, so I'm going to try to make this one count. It seems like strength, more so than muscle mass, is more strongly correlated with both life and health span. So my question is, beyond hand grip strength, is there a better way to assess overall strength as it relates to longevity? For example, could we assess lower body strength, pushing strength, etc., in percentiles? Like putting someone in the 64th percentile for lower body strength, 71st for pushing, etc. And how would that correlate with longevity? Thanks again. Not sure where I'll be able to find out how much an elephant can deadlift now, but make sure to follow you guys wherever you go next.
So that's a good question. As a bit of context for this one, for people for whom it may sound like this is coming a little bit out of the blue, there's a pretty robust body of literature suggesting that strength is a predictor of longevity, and that people who are stronger at 55, 60 years old tend to live a little bit longer, have a longer lifespan and health span from that point than people who are weaker at 55, 60 years old. But most of that research uses hand grip strength as their test for strength for determining the stronger versus weaker people. And so Frank is asking, basically just like, is that the best metric? Are there other metrics that one could use that would work better? And I suspect so. Like, I don't know. I don't see a reason to suspect that hand grip strength would correlate with longevity, but like knee extension strength wouldn't, for instance. But I do also think that essentially, I don't know. So like, this to me is one of those things where I suspect that you could take more strength measurements and probably improve predictive accuracy a bit. Like I can't imagine that a combination of hand grip strength and knee extension strength and isometric chest press strength, you wouldn't be able to build a model to predict longevity even better than you can with just hand grip strength alone. But I also question the utility of that a little bit, for a couple reasons. One is that unless you're working for like an insurance agency as an actuary, the like precision of the estimate probably doesn't matter that much for you, I guess. So, like this is something we've talked about a little bit as it relates to like body composition assessments, how like on a group level, we can estimate body comp quite well. On an individual basis, estimates tend to be rather rough, even with something like DEXA, for instance. And the same thing kind of applies here. Like if research suggests that having like 80th percentile hand grip strength or any other strength measure, if that was predictive of like 8 additional years of longevity or whatever, the confidence interval on that is going to be huge. And like the prediction interval, like range of individual values, like not even kind of like range of where the population average is likely to fall. But like the individual spread is going to be much, much bigger. And so like, I do think that you could get more precise population level estimates with more strength measures, but the range of individual prediction values is still going to be so broad that for an individual, I don't know that it would have that much utility. And the other thing that I would say is that one of the things that you see when you look at the longevity research is that strength itself is a pretty good predictor of longevity, but the research looking at the degree to which resistance training, and especially the amount of resistance training you do, is predictive of longevity is like quite a bit weaker, or at least not suggestive of the exact same relationship. So like the epidemiological research looking at like how much resistance exercise is predictive of increased longevity, it's up to like, I don't know, like 90 to 120 minutes of total resistance training per week. Whereas if the relationship between strength and longevity was strictly causal, you would expect that to be like basically the more resistance training you do, the longer you live. And I think that to some extent, the strength measures themselves are kind of a bit of a proxy for how like how strong and muscular someone like quote unquote naturally is. And so like basically the idea that when a metric becomes a target, it stops being as good of a metric. It's not that I think that lifting is going to negatively impact longevity, but I do think when I hear a lot of lifters ask about this, the inflection tends to be, or at least like the thing underpinning it seems to be a lot of times like, hey, if I get as strong as possible, like if I train really hard and get as jacked and strong as possible by 60 years old, that's going to make me live a lot longer, right? And like, I'm not convinced about like just how causal that is. Again, because we don't see as strong of a relationship between amount of resistance training someone does in longevity. B is like most of the research looking at strength and longevity kind of splits things out by quartiles, and like the top 2 quartiles tend to do a lot better than the bottom quartile. And sometimes the top quartile is a little bit better than the second quartile. Sometimes it's not. But like, if you think about just when you're walking down the street, look at everyone around 60 years old and just be like, hey, like, what is, how jacked is the 60-year-old that I'm seeing that seems to be more muscular and in better shape than 3 out of 4 of them? And if you're in a room of 100 just 60-year-olds in the general population, the 75th percentile there is not that strong and that muscular. Like, I do think there's some diminishing returns there. And yeah, I don't know. Like, basically to answer the question, I do think that you could probably on a population level get slightly more precise predictions if you did have more metrics of strength rather than just hand grip strength. But one of the reasons I think hand grip strength is good is that it does help isolate a little bit more just kind of like just like how strong someone is like inherently versus like trying to pick up on training effects, because I do think those two things are like considerably different, or at least like meaningfully different to some extent. And just to put like explain that a little bit more, like why that distinction matters, is like the biggest reason, or like one of the big reasons why it is helpful to be strong from a longevity perspective, strong and muscular, but more so strong, but kind of both, is that like basically you want to be able to keep moving to live a long time. Like moving is good for you, being able to be independent, take care of yourself, do activities of daily living, and maintain high enough levels of activity to maintain high enough levels of fitness that you can just like kind of be in good shape. So if something bad happens, you get sick, you get some type of disease, like your body is robust enough to fight it off. But like the way that losses in physical function tend to occur with aging is like there is a bit of a gradual decline, but in terms of like end of life stuff, so not talking about changes that people experience from like their 40s to their 50s, but when people go from still being able to lead healthy, active lives to like quite bad shape, and you get the feeling that like end of life stuff is coming up pretty soon. Most of the time, like that kind of last stage there is arrived at in kind of a chunk. Like someone is in decent shape, they're doing okay, and then they get some sort of illness, they have an extended stay in the hospital, whatever, and like they lose a lot of strength and a lot of function in that process, and they just struggle to get it back. And like their fitness kind of takes a big step down, and that's like a fairly permanent decline. And like the reason that like sort of natural strength levels, and this also applies to like aerobic fitness as well, like VO2 max is a predictor of longevity. Like the same principle applies that I've been talking about with strength. Like VO2 max is a strong predictor of longevity, but there's a weaker relationship between volume of intense aerobic training and longevity than you would expect if that was like a directly causal relationship as well. And I think it's because like essentially those big setbacks are like the thing that really are like shaving a lot of years off the life there at the end. And I do think that the strength association, the VO2 max association is a bit like people who are just like naturally stronger or just like naturally have higher levels of aerobic fitness independent of exercise are the people who just like find it easier to bounce back from things like that a little bit easier. Where like, you know, if you're strong because you exercise like an absolute madman all the time, that's awesome. And if you spend 3 months in the hospital, you're going to lose a lot of muscle and a lot of strength. And if you're 75 already, it might be difficult to build a lot of that back. If you're someone who's like almost as strong and almost as muscular with considerably less exercise, if you have to take that same 3 month stay in the hospital, you'll probably lose quite a bit less while you're in. And like, since you weren't having to do that much to maintain what you had previously, it will be probably a little bit easier to get more of it back. And so, yeah, like I think hand grip strength is good because it does help isolate a little bit more that kind of like, sort of like, it's a bit more of an independent measure of strength than something that like people in the gym are going to be specifically training for. Because like you do improve your grip by rowing, doing pull downs, deadlifts, whatever. But like most people aren't training their grip super hard. Like it's not like a core focus of training for most people. And so for that reason, I do think it makes for a pretty good strength assessment for kind of like longevity estimation purposes. So I don't know how directly that answered Frank's question, but those are just some of my thoughts on the topic.
POV, you just asked Greg, hey, how's your day going? But I wanted to give a sort of not TLDR response, but more of a like my opinion is that I don't know if it's useful to look for a specific metric in terms of strength and longevity, given the fact that my thinking is that if you're engaging in resistance training until your older age and you're doing plenty of stuff and, you know, keeping relatively strong in the gym, or at least doing your best to get stronger over time, and you've been doing so for a while, it's likely that you're getting a lot, if not all, the benefits from resistance training, regardless of whether maybe, you know, your grip strength is in a certain percentile or whatever. Would you agree with that sort of view in terms of like practical applications? Just continue lifting and it's likely that you're not missing out on much.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, I think if you're getting in the gym 2 or 3 times a week for like a total of like 90 to 120 minutes of resistance training and getting after it pretty hard while you're in there, I think your ducks are in a row from that perspective. And yeah, like the like I mentioned, like when a metric becomes a goal, it ceases being a good metric. Like I do not think that if someone specifically trains their grip strength to get themselves into a higher grip strength percentile, that's going to directly and causally make them live longer. And I guess what I was getting at a little bit with like assessing other metrics of strength that may be more directly related to the types of things that lifters would be training, I think that's like selecting a metric that is already a goal, where like whatever association you found would in part be picking up sort of inherent differences in strength and would in part be picking up training effects. So it would be like not doing quite as good of a job of isolating strength as like an independent variable. And sort of like the same thing where if they found a stronger association between knee extension strength and longevity than grip strength and longevity, I think it's good to train lower body, obviously, but I don't think like going out of your way to get your knee extension strength from like the 80th percentile to the 99th would like have that strong of a direct effect on longevity. Like, yeah, I don't know. I hope some of that made sense.
Made a lot of sense. Anything to add, Milo?
Yeah. I mean, just like with VO2 max, I do think a lot of what Greg said makes sense. Like, hey, if your genetics and your lifestyle overall mean that you're not in those bottom 20, 30, 40 percentiles, that's probably a good thing. But whether or not that means that someone should train to like purely maximize strength, maximize longevity, or whether you need to have an absurdly high VO2 max to maximize longevity, I am a lot more skeptical of. And so, because percentiles for strength, I think, are quite heavily dependent on genetics, for instance. Like, not entirely, but pretty heavily dependent on genetics. Especially once you get into the top sort of 10 percentiles or so. I'm not sure I would ever advise someone to chase a higher percentile for strength in the aim of maximizing longevity. I would rather just recommend, hey, based on literature, getting into the gym for an hour or two a week, it's going to do you some good for health, and ditto for overall activity. But I wouldn't really worry about percentiles. I think that can be helpful from a public health perspective and research perspective. But when it comes to actually telling you you need to be doing this, I think you can just refer to, oh, I should be doing some exercise. It's good for you. And kind of leave it at that. But yeah, that's my stance. Very boring stance, very simple stance, but hey ho.
No, I'm 100% on board with that. Yeah. I think even like there basically just there's a distinction between saying like stronger people and people in better aerobic shape tend to live longer. That does not necessarily mean that if you do everything within your power to get as strong as possible and maximize your aerobic fitness, that the direct gains you see in longevity will be as large of an effect as kind of those population level trends, because part of what they're picking up is training effects, and part of what they're picking up is just kind of like inherent inter-individual differences. Okay, yeah, let's go ahead and move on to the next one.
This listener wanted to remain anonymous. They specifically asked to remain anonymous. So Mark Smith says, no, I'm joking, that's not their name. Or is it? I have a question about how weightlifting impacts body weight. I have been deadlifting with a professional trainer 2 times a week for 6 years, and I have deadlifted in those sessions 90% of the time. We have used progressive overload to build strength and muscle, but I noticed that my body weight has never really been more than 5 pounds less than my 1 repetition maximum. I have also found that I struggle a lot less now to increase my 1RM. It takes less time and what feels like less effort alongside the body weight gain. My 1RM is 245 pounds and I currently weigh just under 240 pounds. In the last 2 years, I did develop binge eating tendencies and other body image issues which have definitely impacted my body weight, but I was wondering if the demand on my body to lift the heaviest I can 2 times per week is a deterrent to intentional weight loss. Can the demand to hit my 1RM weekly have that much of an effect on my body defending my current weight, and can it induce weight gain when I'm trying to progressively overload?
Do you want to lead off on this one, Milo? I rambled way too much on the first question.
No, you're good. Sure. So, the most honest answer I can give is that, to my knowledge, there is no effect that would directly, resolve that issue. To my knowledge, lifting heavy and going higher in terms of percentage of your max shouldn't inherently make weight loss more difficult. Now, directionally, you could argue that going too heavy too often might reduce your energy expenditure ever so slightly. Like if you're doing higher volume work, maybe you'd burn an extra 50 calories. But that difference in energy expenditure isn't going to cause any meaningful differences in weight loss. So just on principle, I don't think that hitting your 1 rep max twice a week or weekly is going to have any effect, effectively, on your weight loss. It's likely got to do more so with other factors, specifically with overall energy expenditure and overall energy intake. That's the boring answer, and I would love if Greg had anything more unique or interesting to say about it, because maybe I'm missing something.
I'm wondering how mean to be, not to the person asking the question, but to their trainer. Honestly, I think you need to find a new trainer. So that's coming from a couple things. One is it sounds like they're having you work up to a 1 rep max deadlift weekly, which I don't know how much utility that has for you, honestly. And part of the reason I say that is, and I do not mean this at all in a judgmental way. If you've been training for 6 years consistently and your deadlift is within 5 pounds of your body weight, that's tough. I don't know. So part of my answer to this, part of why I'm thinking this is just knowing our audience demographics a bit. If this is an older woman, I retract that, and that's a very good deadlift. If this is a younger woman who weighs around 240, or a man under 70 who weighs around 240, obviously strength genetics vary between people, but after 6 years of training, most people are going to have a better deadlift than that, especially at that body weight if they've been training pretty hard. So I'm not assuming it's a lack of effort on the question asker's part. It just there's not a ton of context in this question, but the vibe I get is that your trainer sucks, honestly. And that it may not be a terrible idea to try to find a new trainer. So that's kind of the most direct and actionable piece of advice I would give to the person asking this question. As it relates to the questions about whether trying to go heavy and get stronger can induce weight gain or make it more difficult to lose weight, I don't think directly physiologically that's the case. I'm not even going to touch on the binge eating disorder part. That's a conversation to have with an RD. But in terms of kind of like psychological impacts, I guess, of weight loss, one of the things that I've personally experienced myself and have heard from other powerlifters, like people really focused on maximal strength, trying to get as strong as possible, is that weight loss can for some people be a little bit of a head fuck because you're trying to get stronger. And it's easier to continue getting stronger when your weight is staying the same or going up, like when you're in an energy surplus. Not that it's impossible to get stronger in a deficit, but especially if you're trying to cut quite a bit of weight, it, like, at some point your strength plateaus and might start going down, especially if you have a pretty fair bit of training experience. And as someone who has experienced that, you can look at like your Wilks score or your IPF points or whatever the fuck scaled strength metric you want. But like, if you used to squat X pounds and you tried that in the gym and it didn't go up, and now your max is like 20 pounds lower, even if like relatively it's higher, there, like if you're the type of person that's just really wired to want to hit bigger numbers, like that can be like psychologically difficult for a lot of people, I think. So as a bit of advice related to like exercise selection to maybe make those psychological aspects of weight loss a little bit easier, it can help a lot to do more body weight training where, maybe your bench press goes down a little bit, but the number of push-ups you can do or the number of dips you can do goes up because you have less body weight you're moving around, like maybe the amount of weight you can use for some sort of rowing exercise stagnates or goes down, but the number of pull-ups you can do increases. Strict step-ups instead of like focusing as much on 1RM squats. Like they're like a focus on body weight exercises, or at least like including more body weight exercises in a program, can, I think, help a lot with motivation when you're losing weight and maybe your max strength starts going down a little bit, because it does, like, it gives you a performance metric that goes up when you lose weight, or at least like weight loss helps to facilitate. So, I'm not sure if that necessarily applies in the question asker's scenario. Like I don't know. I'm not even going to take a guess as to how that relates to binge eating disorder, but just for people that struggle psychologically to get in like a weight loss mindset when trying to improve their performance and get stronger, I've found that to be helpful, and I think a lot of other people do as well.
Cool. Yep. I mean, wanting to be anonymous backfired a bit here because it would have allowed us to sort of, I guess, have a bit more context, because I think we could guess at least the sex of the listener, but I assume that they don't want that given the anonymity. But that was a really solid response. All right, moving on to the next question by Faraz. They ask, for hypertrophy, how important is resistance curve versus range of motion used? Do length and partial versus a full range of motion matter more or less when an exercise maximizes tension and or external moment arms at short versus long muscle lengths? The critique of the new full ROM versus length and partial study by a certain someone says no exercises really maximize tension at longer lengths. Could this have played a major role in the results? What do we think?
Yeah, I can hit us off on this one. Again, this is a couple of questions baked into one. For hypertrophy, how important is resistance curve versus range of motion used? I don't know that we can conclusively answer that or anywhere close to it at this stage. Like, we have a few studies looking at the effects of resistance curve on hypertrophy. Like, we have a study by Nunes and colleagues where they compared cable preacher curls to barbell preacher curls, where with the setup used, they had less resistance in the stretch with the cable preacher curl and more resistance in the stretch with the barbell preacher curl, and vice versa for the shortened position. In that study, for instance, no real difference in growth. But then we have studies that manipulate multiple variables at once, like, for example, a study by Zabaleta Corda and colleagues, where they compare the incline curl to the preacher curl, where for the biceps, the incline curl places them in a more stretched position. But there's also less resistance at the bottom of an incline curl versus at the bottom of a preacher curl. Meanwhile, the preacher curl does present greater resistance at the bottom of the rep, but because the shoulder is slightly flexed, the biceps are being trained in a more shortened position. And in that study, for instance, bicep hypertrophy, or elbow flexors, if I recall correctly, was slightly greater from preacher curls. But then now we have a conference abstract comparing these two exercises again by Mao and colleagues, specifically using MRI to look at all of the elbow flexors individually from the most proximal side possible to the most distal side possible, showing that actually incline curls were slightly better for hypertrophy for the biceps, whereas preacher curls were slightly better for hypertrophy for the remaining elbow flexors. So the point I'm trying to make is that is almost all of the literature we have on the topic, which is not a lot. And of the literature we have, there's somewhat conflicting results in that some studies will find that, hey, more resistance beats out more stretch for hypertrophy. Others will find the opposite. Some won't even find an effect of resistance curve at all, like that Nunes study where they compared the barbell preacher curl to the cable preacher curl. My hunch is that both are somewhat important. But whether or not one is more important than the other, I couldn't tell you at this stage. I think that for you to get maximum benefit from lengthened training, you at least need to get a decent stretch. Whether you need a maximum stretch, we just don't know yet. And I do think you need some resistance in the stretch. Like, I don't think that the resistance provided in incline curls, for instance, I'm not sure if that's sufficient to maximize hypertrophy of the elbow flexors at the bottom. So yeah, not a very satisfactory answer, but that is the only answer that I could actually give at this stage. Before we move on, Greg, thoughts?
No, yeah, I wholly agree. I do. This is a topic that it confuses me a bit when I see people make very confident declarations on social media, where people will be like, "Oh, like this, like if you're trying to like benefit from training at longer muscle lengths, like you absolutely need to select exercises that maximize the tension the muscles are exposed to at those longer muscle lengths." And like you said, there's not that much research on the topic, and the research that does exist is pretty mixed. And I'm just like, why are you so confident about this? Like, I don't think that level of confidence is justified. Like, I do think that, I do very strongly suspect that if you were dealing with an exercise where the resistance curve was like basically no challenge at long muscle lengths, I do think that's probably not going to be ideal. So like, I'm going to reveal my background here as more on the strength side of things than the hypertrophy side of things by the first example that came to mind here. I'm sure other people would think of an example of some exercise that you would set up with like cables to manipulate resistance curves or whatever. But the first thing that comes to mind for me is like squatting, obviously, with straight weights versus like only band resistance, where like if you went really hard on the squat and all of the resistance came from bands, such that in the whole, the bands are completely slack and you have like no resistance at all, and it only starts ramping up as you go through the concentric. I don't think that's going to be ideal for hypertrophy, like even if you're matching the muscle lengths you're training, because there's so little resistance there at long muscle lengths. Yeah, I don't think that's going to be the best thing in the world for quad growth. Like, I think that's probably going to be worse than straight weight, where you do have like greater resistance at longer muscle lengths. But I'm not aware of any strong and consistent evidence that you necessarily need to go out of your way to maximize the tension that your muscles are under at long muscle lengths. Like as long as there's some significant degree of tension, my understanding is that that's sufficient, or at least there's no strong reason to think that that's not sufficient. So I don't know. It is just one of those things where I see a lot of people who seem extremely confident that the resistance curve is going to make like a huge difference. And like, I'm not convinced of that because I'm not aware of that much research to back it up.
Yeah. And if anything, black pill take the study, the latest study on the topic, train hard, do some lifting. It's all going to be fine. There you go. Here's your stronger by science response. Enough. Hamadi asks, I want to bulk and gain muscle, but I have fears and questions regarding it. If someone yo-yo dieted, let's say for a contest or a photo shoot, and now their metabolism hasn't fully recovered, so they gained more weight and fat that they lost, now the original deficit isn't working and they need to go lower. What's the approach there? Maintain the weight gained and suck it up till metabolism catches up? Or is there a fix for that person?
Greg, I think as the preeminent metabolism enjoyer as of recently, as per your 7-part article series on macrofactorapp.com, I think you should be the one to see this off.
Yeah, so I think this is tough because what the research on the topic tends to indicate is that once people do regain the weight that they lose when dieting, both lean mass and fat mass, like fat mass regaining, leptin comes back up, lean mass regaining organ mass, muscle mass, like more metabolically active tissues. Like, yeah, it seems like for the most part, as people regain tissue, like whatever metabolic slowdowns they experienced when dieting tend to reverse. And to the extent that they don't, there's at least a hypothesis. Like, I don't know how much like direct empirical evidence there is for this. I think it's a little bit extrapolated from research on yo-yo dieters. Like for a subset of people, the number of diets that people have previously attempted is predictive of higher body weights and BMIs. And a hypothesis to explain that, I think first advanced by Dulloo, Dulloo, I believe, is essentially that like when people crash diet, they lose fat, but they also lose lean mass. And then after, like in the post-diet hyperphagia response, people rapidly regain weight, but they regain fat faster than they gain muscle. And so when they, or just like lean mass in general. And so like when they return to their previous body weight, it's now at a higher body fat level and a lower muscle mass level than they were previously. And so as a result, kind of like their metabolic rate at that body weight is a little bit slower than it was previously. And then if you repeat that 2 or 3 more times, you do wind up with kind of like a gradual downward trend in metabolic rate relative to total body mass. But yeah, like I said, I'm not sure how much like direct empirical evidence there is for that, but that is a hypothesis that's floating around out there. I think that I suspect for the person asking this question, it wouldn't surprise me if some of what you're experiencing, though, is more behavioral than directly metabolic. And by that, I mean like a pretty good chunk of your energy expenditure doesn't come from resting metabolism. It comes from energy expended during exercise or like NEAT, non-exercise activity thermogenesis, just the amount of energy you burn, fidgeting, moving around, activities of daily living, etc. And I do think that for a lot of people, once they diet to like extreme levels of leanness, there's a lot of, or there can be a pretty fair bit of like fairly intense lingering fatigue that goes along with that. Like that's a very like stressful thing to do, and your body adapts in a variety of ways to conserve energy as you're getting leaner and leaner and leaner. And some of that is going to be a reduction in resting metabolism, but a lot of that is going to be behavioral adaptations, like moving around a bit less. Even if like your even if your step count doesn't change, like your body gets like a little bit more efficient at moving to kind of like save every calorie it can. And I wouldn't be surprised if some of those adaptations persist when people begin regaining weight, either like kind of more direct behavioral adaptations, like, you know, maybe your overall activity levels are a little bit lower now than they were the last time you were around this body weight, or potentially some more of those like subtle but difficult to measure, difficult to measure outside of a lab setting type of deal, things where like, you know, gains in global movement economy where like whatever you do now, you're a little bit more efficient at doing it. I wouldn't be surprised if something along those lines was contributing as well. And so, you know, the question is what to do about it. And I kind of think that's up to you. So like in the research on weight loss maintenance, which isn't exactly what's going on here, but I suspect it applies at least in an analogical type of way, is that like whatever, like when people achieve a particular body weight that they're having difficulty maintaining, basically like the longer they maintain it, the easier it becomes to maintain it. So like if you are still just dealing with some residual effects from the diet that you were on, I do think that I wouldn't recommend trying to diet hard again now, certainly. I think probably just spend some time at your current weight, and it should gradually become more comfortable over time. And when it does, and you're feeling better and you're thinking like, hey, maintaining this weight isn't that much of a challenge anymore, then maybe you could think about dieting again. But I would absolutely recommend going slower and not trying to get as lean. Like I think this experience, there should be some learning lessons from it. Like it sounds like things didn't go as well as you may have liked for them to have gone, especially on the back end. And I think a lot of that is just like rate and endpoint. Like either you got way leaner than your body is comfortable getting, or you dieted way faster than your body is comfortable dieting. So I think if in the future you wanted to diet down again, probably either pull the plug a bit sooner or take your time a bit more.
Yeah, spot on. Especially the last part is something that that resonates with me from a coaching standpoint, because there have been clients who have asked similar questions, and that was exactly more or less the response that I gave. Milo, anything to add? Awesome.
No, I think that, like, maybe I'm blackpilled about this, and I think there's definitely some stuff that's under your control. But when it comes to metabolism and energy expenditure and just facilitating weight loss and or weight maintenance after weight loss, physical activity is great, and generally having a healthy lifestyle, but I'm not 100% sure you can do, like, people often talk about the importance of maintenance phases, for instance, like between weight loss phases. And I think you can get caught up in the specifics versus the broad strokes you need to follow. Like, it doesn't need to be a maintenance phase. It doesn't need to be a certain length. It's just a matter of sort of a function of calories / energy state and time versus there being a prescriptive approach that we have the research to really back up. This is exactly what we should do. So yeah, I just broadly agree with Greg. I think it depends on what you want out of that situation. There's different ways to go about it.
Nice. Ashley asks,
on the second warm-up episode recently, Dr. Wolf mentioned that shorter rest times maximize a hypertrophy response, despite the fact of longer rest times often leading to greater performance. If someone, let's say a friend of mine who is definitely not me, is a lazy powerlifter who rests 6 or 7 minutes between volume squat sets, are they likely leaving gains on the table versus someone more diligently resting only 2 minutes and possibly getting fewer reps towards the end of their squat work?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know what, Greg, you go first, because I want to hear your take before I give my obviously biased response to myself. So I want to hear your steel, man.
Sure. I think that I think the generalizability of research is something that always needs to be considered. And I think that, I don't know, like whatever like a pooled meta-analytic effect of rest intervals is, I would not approach it with the assumption that those same rest intervals and effects of those rest intervals would apply to all exercises all the time. And so, for instance, like, you know, a bicep curl versus deadlifts, say. And let's say you're doing sets of 12. And, like, let's just assume that you don't necessarily need to, like, completely maintain performance to the greatest degree possible set to set to maximize the hypertrophic response of the set, but, like, you probably don't want your performance absolutely dropping off a cliff. Like, that's probably not ideal for the hypertrophic response you get from it. Like, you do a set of 12 bicep curls, and let's say you rest a minute and a half, you take the same weight, do it again. Can you get 12 reps? Maybe. Maybe not. Maybe you only get 10, maybe you get 9, but, like, you're going to perform pretty well the next set. It's going to be okay. You do a set of 12 deadlifts with, like, a challenging load, taking it pretty close to failure. You rest a minute and a half. You walk back up to the bar. How are you going to do on that next set? Probably not fucking good. Like, it's a different beast. And so, like, I do, and I think that's even more the case as people get stronger, just because the energy cost of lifting scales with the amount of work that's being done, work in the physics sense. And so, like, if you're lifting twice as much weight for the same number of reps, the set requires twice as much work, has roughly twice the energy cost. And so, yeah, like, I do suspect that the amount of rest between sets necessary to maximize the hypertrophy response from subsequent sets is probably a little bit greater for, like, particularly compound lower body exercises for people who are quite strong than it is for single joint exercises or like compound exercises for people who are weaker. And so like I don't think you're leaving gains on the table by resting for 6 or 7 minutes between sets if the total amount of volume you're doing is the same. Like I don't know that 6 or 7 sets is necessary. Maybe the hypertrophic response there could be maximized with like 3 minutes between sets or 4 minutes. And like you're making your session take longer, but if it's get a certain number of sets done in 2 hours versus an hour 15, I think those sets will be just as effective if you're resting longer between them. And depending on the exercise and your training status, potentially slightly more so. So I don't know. I wouldn't overgeneralize from kind of like pooled meta-analytic results without considering like all of those contexts. Like and for this question in particular, it's asking like lazy powerlifter. I'm assuming they're pretty strong doing volume squat sets. I don't think 6 or 7 minutes is an unreasonable amount of time to rest between sets. Personally, part of that's based on experience. If I'm doing like sets of 10 squats, I'm not resting 2 minutes between sets. Fuck that. Absolutely not. Like if I'm resting 6 or 7 minutes between sets, I'm getting it. Like I might be pushing it to 10 if I'm being completely honest. So yeah, to me that seems fine. But what do you think, Milo?
I'll give my anecdotal experience first, and that is when I am squatting and deadlifting, and I'm doing it for like 8 to 12 reps, or 5 to 10, let's say. When I was trying to maximize load on the bar and try to feel pretty good going into sets, yeah, I'd often be resting over 10 minutes. When it comes to whether or not you're missing out on hypertrophy, my hunch is that you're not, but it's hard to say for sure. So I was specifically one of the people involved in extracting data from the rest time research for the meta-analysis that kind of found this. And so I had a kind of semi-close look at, well, pretty close look at all the studies included. And to my knowledge, from my recollection, at least a few of the studies did include like squats in the sort of hypertrophy rep range. Now, obviously, we're not talking about highly trained lifters. Not every study had that. And the amount of studies involved precluded subgroup analysis, wherein we looked at specifically lower body training, etc. But there was some research in that realm. My hunch is that Greg is probably right in saying that slightly longer rest times make sense for hypertrophy for higher reps, compound work, and maybe for more advanced lifters. You could go the other way and say, hey, more advanced lifters also tend to have slightly higher VO2 maxes or what have you, and therefore they can actually cope with the same rest times and be fine, even though their energetic demands per set tend to increase. But yeah, like I think there's a possibility that shortening and constraining your rest times to say around 2 minutes could actually lead to more growth versus like 10 minutes, but it would be via a mechanism that is currently unclear and that would require substantiating before I can make that claim confidently. That's why I think looking at the applied empirical evidence on the outcomes of interest tends to be the simplest way to kind of figure out what should I do in practice versus thinking, well, yeah, generalizability might not be great here, so let's theory craft around which demographics and in which contexts there might be a detriment. I tend to be on the side of, let's assume that if there's a decent amount of research here and we don't have much evidence to the contrary, and the evidence we do have is more mechanistic or acute in nature, let's assume this generalizes at least reasonably well. So yeah, I would say you're probably not missing out on growth, TLDR, and you're probably fine. There is a case where you have finite resources, like you don't have infinite time to train, and therefore if you're spending 10 minutes resting between sets and you only have an hour to train, you're getting 5 sets of squats in. Versus if you're resting for 2 to 5 minutes, let's say, all of a sudden you're tripling your volume. So you can make a case that for a lot of people, resting for too long can practically reduce their hypertrophy just via opportunity costs. But I think on principle, if you had infinite time and you wanted to rest, say, 5 or 6 minutes instead of 2 between sets of squats, I don't think you're reducing hypertrophy necessarily, or at least I couldn't say so with any confidence. That's my stance, and practically I do think most people are better off resting somewhere in the neighborhood of 1 to 2 minutes, maybe a bit north of 2 minutes for lower body movements, because almost everyone has some degree of time constraints involved, and so far the empirical evidence is leaning towards 1 to 2 minutes gets you probably close to optimal growth. So, yeah, that is my stance. Greg, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think there are, like, for the person asking this question, I do think that there are just like practicality considerations. Yeah, not even like practicality, but just kind of like, I don't know, like context, I guess. They said they were a power lifter. And so, like, I do suspect that they're squatting for, like, they're obviously trying to I suspect trying to achieve some hypertrophy here, but also like their performance on the squat sets probably matters as well. Like they're trying to get a strength effect too, I strongly suspect. And so, like, I do kind of think that if performance is your goal, like your main lifts like this, you focus on performance first and foremost. And then, like, if they do also want to get some additional volume in for an additional hypertrophic effect, like, do some like knee extensions or lunges or something like that with a minute between sets. Like I don't know, like for a power lifter asking about squat, bench, deadlift specifically, I don't think I would ever like recommend shorter rest times. I think that like you're doing that as sports practice, and like any hypertrophy you get on top of it is kind of like a nice little cherry on top. And then there's like other stuff you can do in your workout to promote hypertrophy. So I think that for a power lifter asking this question, just like rest as long as you need to perform well.
Cool. Yeah, I did not get there was a tiny bit of controversy around this meta with rest. I tend to view things more from more training flexibility. Turns out that if you're pressed for time, even resting less than we thought is totally fine, and you're not going to be leaving massive gains on the table. But people seem to take this as a sort of like, okay, this is the new hard cut rest period limit, and if you're resting above 2 minutes based on this meta, you are, I don't know, doing something wrong. But yeah, moving on to Mason.
Hey guys, this is a question for the sports fans. I'm sure we've all seen where a player in a major professional sports league sustains an injury, and if you look at the comments on Reddit or any other social media, a litany of the comments will suggest that, the player's on PEDs, or all players are on PEDs. It's stuff we don't know about. It's better. It's different mechanisms that don't affect hormones. And, it's really something that I've seen become more prevalent of a discussion just in the last couple years. You really can't go to basically any comment section without seeing that. And so I was wondering, how feasible is it that, there really are these super drugs out here that, these players have access to that we're not even really familiar with?
So I think this is a classic question around any sort of professional sporting event where it's assumed that, all professional athletes at a very high level are on some form of PEDs because they are exceptional at what they do, and because there is there's a financial incentive to them performing really well. I empathize with that because we've seen, many popular athletes in the Olympics, for example, and I'll just use, a couple of Greeks. Greek athletes as an example, where you often hear cases of people at a very high level being caught on PEDs eventually after years where they were testing clean. But as far as super drugs that are out there that people have access to, I don't think whether that's true, and I wouldn't necessarily assume that every professional athlete out there is on PEDs, especially in countries where PEDs are illegal, and depending on their sport and the drug testing protocols that they follow, that can sometimes be very difficult. Do I think that every professional athlete out there is completely drug-free and there's no chance that they are potentially doing something behind the scenes that is not in accordance to the drug testing and the drug use federation laws or whatever they're following? No. But I don't think that it's a productive sort of exercise for anybody to try and deduct whether professional athletes are on PEDs, because at the end of the day, professional athletes are where they are because they are also in genetic anomalies as far as their sport is concerned. So chances are that many of them are not on PEDs, and even if they are, unless you find out about it explicitly through a drug test, I don't think it really changes much. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that, I don't know. I see where this comes from, but I think that it would do a lot of people a lot of good to just learn more about modern drug testing, because you can get a pretty good idea of like the type of stuff that people could get away with if you know the types of testing protocols that they're under. And yeah, like I think that would probably give people like a pretty decent indication, because like I do think people dramatically underestimate how good the best modern, like motivated to catch cheaters style drug testing is. I think people still have in their mind kind of the Balco era, or like Lance Armstrong, like being like never failing a test while winning a bunch of Tour de France's or whatever, and just having this idea that that like the cheaters are always ahead of the testers, and kind of it is what it is. But I do think it's important to note, like highly motivated, well-resourced drug testing is a lot newer than I think people realize. If memory serves, and it may not, I may be off by one Olympiad, but I think 1988 was the first Olympics where performance-enhancing drugs were actually banned. And 92 or 96 was the first Olympics where like a lot of people were actually tested. And then it was like another Olympiad when kind of like off-season testing became like much more common. And so like, I don't know, when Lance Armstrong was doing his things, like drug testing was kind of new. Like they hadn't been doing it for that long. And like similar with like the Balco scandal. And now there's like 3 decades of folks improving quite a lot. And like this is already a bit of a dated reference, which makes me feel kind of old. But like as of I think 2014 Sochi Winter Olympics, when you have the Russian state apparatus trying to help its athletes be able to use gear and beat tests, what was the state of the art drug protocol that they came up with to help their athletes do that? Oh wait, they didn't have one. It was literally just like passing cups of piss back and forth between a hole in a wall to like swap it out with clean urine. Like that's, as of 2014, the way that like a highly resourced, motivated state actor decided like this is our best method for beating drug tests. Like basically we beat the drug test by not even trying to beat the drug tests. Cause like they're pretty good. And so like, yeah, I think so. A couple things can really dictate the quality of a testing protocol. One is just simply the types of tests that they do. So a big one for people like in sports where they might want to use androgens is do they ever or with any frequency use carbon isotope ratio testing? Like it just has a much longer detection window than the kind of like standard testosterone to epitestosterone ratio test. It's also far more sensitive than those tests. And so like if it's a sport that doesn't do any CIR testing, like folks can not microdose. That's people using like mushrooms and shit. But like they can use like low doses of stuff and just keep their TDE ratio below whatever the cutoff is for the sport, typically 4-1, and just kind of like get away with it. So yeah, that's something to look for. If they just do ratio testing, yeah, there's probably a lot of people using low doses and getting away with it. Like that was kind of the Lance Armstrong method. Another big one is like, are they storing samples? Because like tests are getting better and there are analytes that people either didn't know to test for or couldn't test for at some point in the past, and then they figure out how to test for them. And then you can go back and retest samples, and a lot of people get popped on retests. So that like in 2014, I believe, there were better tests made for some of the fast-acting steroids that, or like not fast-acting steroids, but steroids with short half-lives that a lot of Olympic athletes, particularly weightlifters, were using. And so then when they went and retested samples from 2008 and 2012, it was an absolute bloodbath. And there were some division. I think there was like one weight class where like the person who finished 5th ended up with the gold medal because like everyone else got popped on retests. And just knowing that like samples are being stored and that you can like be sued for like prize money you won and like medals and accolades and whatnot being stripped, I think does function at least as some degree of deterrence from people wanting to use stuff that maybe couldn't be detected now, but you have sufficient reason to believe might be able to be detected in the future. And then the last one, and this is a really big one, it's just like, what are the details of the testing protocol and like when people can be tested? So do you have true, random, unannounced testing year round in ways that don't have loopholes that someone could drive a truck through? And if you aren't where you said you would be for a test, are there consequences? And so like, if you're in the testing pool for Olympic sports in the US, like this applies to you, you have to let USADA know about your whereabouts essentially 24/7. And if you're not there for a test, you're in trouble. I think like 2 missed tests are treated as a positive test, like treated as a adverse analytical inference. And so, yeah, like in sports where you maybe have some time away from testing, or like if there's like too big of a window, like in the evenings. So like I'm sure I'm going to get these details wrong, but with USADA, for instance, I think essentially your kind of like free time is like midnight to 6 a.m. Like they're not going to knock on your apartment door at like 3 a.m. and say like, hey, wake up, you got to piss. But yeah, so I think you have like a 6-hour window at night where yeah, you can, like, if you wanted to maybe like use a little growth hormone or something, like something with like a short half-life, like short detection window, you could like maybe theoretically try to get away with it. Although I think they're getting better at testing for peptides now too. Like, this is also a few years ago, but I remember they popped Pat Mendez twice for growth hormone, which honestly surprised me. And something I've heard like in the cycling world is that they've gotten a lot better at testing for EPO, which is another like peptide hormone with a short half-life, short glow time is what the cyclists would call it. And so now like people who are trying to do stuff like that are just going back to like classic blood doping, where you just kind of like extract your blood, spin down the red blood cells and re-inject them instead of trying to take exogenous substances to achieve the same effect, because they're getting better at testing for them. But yeah, so like if there's if instead of like 6 hours at night there's like 14 hours at night, like if you knew that from like, I don't know, 10 p.m. until noon you're not going to have a tester show up, then like you could probably get away with using low doses of some stuff and not getting popped. And then the big one is just like, are there gaps in the testing calendar? And so like, I don't want to tell tales out of school because I don't have like a perfect memory of every sports testing protocol, but like I know for some of them they don't test over the summer. Like if like once the season gets done, the testers might show up when you show up to training camp again. But from the end of the season until kind of like the start of the next preseason, you're good. Like you could do whatever you wanted. There's no off-season testing. And I don't know if this is still the case in the NBA, but I know that in the prior collective bargaining agreement, the details of the testing protocol were basically that like each player would be tested 5 times per year and could only be tested 5 times per year. That was like something that the Players Association kind of like got in the CBA, and that the last day you could be tested was the last day of the regular season, which essentially meant that like once you get tested for the 5th time, have fun. Like you could do whatever the fuck you wanted, or at the end of the regular season, like you want to tune up for the playoffs, or if you're maybe differently motivated, and it was back when marijuana was a banned substance by the league, it's like, yeah, you want to have some fun in the playoffs. Like there's things you can do. All of which is to say, like, in a situation like that, I still don't think everyone's doing gear, but like there's fucking loopholes where, like announcers talk about, oh, like the young teams have like the fresh legs in the regular season, but the playoffs is when like experience and championship pedigree and like the veterans really shine. It's like, well, I think there's a lot of that, like experience being on that stage before, but also maybe if you're a little older, you have a little less endurance, you've lost some pep in your step, but now the season's over and you can take some stuff to roll the clock back a little bit. Who knows? Like that might contribute to veterans being able to step up in the playoffs. Who can say? All of which is to say, yeah, all of those things make a difference. Like, I do think that, like, really, if a sport has, like, motivated, well-funded drug testing, where they're doing random unannounced tests year-round, using the best analytical methods, and storing samples for retests, like, it's not that it's impossible to cheat, but, like, it's fucking hard. And, like, the way that people do it when they do is mostly just trying to make it like not lying about what their whereabouts are, but just making it difficult for folks to come out to test them. That's a big thing in like distance running, where they're like, basically if you're an American runner, like there are certain countries around the world where like their local testing bodies like effectively don't exist. Like their version of USADA just doesn't give a shit, like doesn't really test anyone. And so like you could go train in your off season there and like truthfully tell USADA like, hey, I'm in this country training like during my off season. And like they don't have the budget to put a USADA tester on the plane and send them over there. And like the local testing authorities probably aren't going to do anything. So it's like, like you beat tests by not getting tested. And like that is kind of the meta, because if you're getting tested, like the tests are good and it's very, very difficult to beat them. And like, yeah, like Olympic athletes and like athletes in sports with like WADA tier testing aren't, as far as I'm aware, really aren't trying to beat the test by like using stuff and not getting called. Like most of the time they're trying to beat the test by dodging the testers, and like finding those loopholes to go places for long periods of time where no one's going to show up to test them. But like the tests are fucking hard to beat. If it's a sport that is just doing like kind of a basic panel, like if they're doing the style of testing that was being done to Lance Armstrong in the 90s, like, yeah, people can beat those tests. Like they beat them all the time. And yeah, there are probably more people using drugs in those sports and getting away with it. And then the testing window is a big one. Like if the sport has a limit on how often in a year someone can be tested, once people hit that limit, I suspect more people in sports like that are using gear than people in other styles of sports. So all of which is to say, I think it varies sport by sport. And I think you can get a decent idea of what it looks like based on like reading about and thoroughly understanding the testing protocol. But I definitely don't think all pro athletes are on gear. And I think the ones that aren't using like crazy advanced shit that's like impossible to detect and test for. I think the ones that are using it are just like competing in leagues that have lax testing protocols, and they're using testosterone and like EPO and just like growth hormone and normal ass shit. Like I don't think like the black market chemists are like way ahead of the testers, and that is not the vector where that war is being waged. Like it's mostly about just trying to get laxer testing protocols or figuring out how to not get tested. Like that's kind of where things are at right now, because modern tests are really fucking good.
Yep, 100%. And people also need to remember that, there's multiple different layers as far as like the people involved in professional sports, including sponsors, whatever, shareholders, yada, yada, yada. And I very much doubt that you can be transparent with anything, AAS or PED related. So it's unlikely that there's a big conspiracy where they have access to this super lab and everybody's on the same page and they're like, yep, we're rocking it behind the scenes and we have access to these very advanced substances. I think it's a case-by-case basis rather than every team agreeing that, we're all going to keep quiet about this.
Yeah, no, I agree wholeheartedly. And I think like, I don't know. I think some sports leagues probably do just want people to be able to use stuff because like it's putting a better product on the field. But yeah, I don't know. I do think it varies. Like I think a lot of it is just like cultural. Like different sports have different cultures. Yeah, I don't know. Like I think that I understand the position that like, oh, if there's all of this money on the line, like everyone's going to be doing everything they can to secure the bag and get that contract. But like, I do think it's worth keeping in mind that sort of like, I don't know, I think it's more along the lines of like people are just kind of most likely to do what they feel like they have to do to kind of like advance and keep the ball rolling. So like, I don't know, someone who's like a good athlete in high school, but maybe like not quite good enough to get a D1 offer in college might say like, maybe I need to use some chemical enhancement to like get there. But then like by the time they get there, if they needed to use gear to get there, they're probably not going to be a standout. Like they barely made it to that level. And the people that were able to get to that level without having to do the same stuff, they're going to leave them in the dust, like continue to develop better. And then like, the folks who are going to get drafted to the pros that don't need to use shit to do it, like they're not going to, like they're going to be less likely to. That's an unnecessary risk. But like some people that are there kind of on the fringe might say, yeah, I got to do what I got to do to like get my foot in the door, like make it to the league, whatever. But then like, again, once they get there, if they had to go down that road to barely make it, they're probably not going to be a standout. And then like, yeah, the folks who are like, maybe competing for that second contract or like, getting some time in the rotation, like getting some playing time, but like they're like, yeah, maybe they're like, essentially, if you need to do some shit, like I think that a lot of people will do some shit, but if you don't, like it's an unnecessary risk. And I don't know, like I don't think people are going to, especially now that like in a lot of sports, the bans for performance enhancing drugs, like the suspensions and whatnot, are like much, much longer. I do think that the risk to reward calculus like isn't what it once was. Like I do, like I think PED use is like pretty widespread, but I think like if I'm just taking a guess, I think probably between like a quarter and a half of pro athletes are using shit. Maybe up to 2/3. I don't think it's anywhere close to 100%. Like not like I think it's a sizable minority. Like I don't think it's unheard of, but I don't think it's like completely pervasive everywhere. That's my hunch.
Everybody's a fake natty. You heard it here first. Yeah. Shall we jump to the last question forever, I guess, for the politics, or at least for the foreseeable future?
Yes, sir. Let's do it.
So, Max Thomas asks,
what would your general recommendation be for a teenager who's 15 and is trying to gain muscle and strength at the same time, in terms of exercise selection, weekly volume, rep ranges, intensity, and kind of effort as well. So like RIR, like going to failure all the way or not. And also what the nutrition side should look like. So calories, kind of how much of a surplus, and what the macro spread should be. Yeah, that'd be great.
Loaded question. Thank you so much for asking, dear listener. And I will do my best to give you a short response that covers sort of everything you've asked for. So, assuming you are the teenager in question, first of all, congratulations on embarking on your lifting journey and listening to Stronger by Science. If this is for somebody else, congratulations to them. I'd say that I started lifting around that time as well, around 15 or 16. And unfortunately, I was not a Stronger by Science listener, nor a strength theory follower at the time. I'm not sure if that even existed. But for many of us out there, we just ended up doing whatever. However, in your case, I would recommend that you start by doing a plethora of exercises that are compound exercises, including classic exercises like the squat, the bench press, the overhead press, the deadlift, the row, but also while using machine exercises if you have access to them. As a general rule of thumb, picking out 2 to 3 exercises per major muscle group should cover you as far as exercise selection, and do more than that. And the only reason I'm recommending learning some of the classic barbell lifts is that I think they can allow you to become a to become better at certain movement patterns that can then allow you to be very versatile in terms of your overall exercise selection in the future. So like learning how to deadlift, learning how to squat, learning how to bench press, learning how to overhead press and barbell row. Then you have so many different variations and other exercises that involve similar movement patterns. And in general, it will make your life a bit easier. Additionally, they are fun exercise to learn, but keep in mind that if for whatever reason you don't like any of those lifts or their variations, you could very well just do any machine exercise and do 2 or 3 machine exercises for all your muscle groups and be covered. As far as weekly volume goes, I would start on the low end. So I would do somewhere around 8 to 12 fractional sets per muscle group per week, where you'd count like a set of bench press or a pushing exercise as half a set for your tricep and a full set, 1 set for the prime mover in that case. Stay somewhere in the 5 to 12, maybe 5 to 15, but I'd recommend personally staying in the 5 to 12 rep range just so that you can feel confident that you know that you're truly training close to failure. I would keep most things in the 0 to 2 reps in reserve mark. As a rule of thumb, maybe 60 to 70% around the 1 to 2 RIR mark, and then having the remainder 30 or 40% to failure. So you get familiar with what failure feels like. And, if you're really trying to push yourself and progress, there will be cases where you'll just naturally go to failure. As far as your nutrition, I would say that gaining roughly 1% of your body weight per month while doing your best to consume a good amount of protein per meal will cover you anywhere from 1.5 to 2 grams per kilo of body weight. As far as your protein intake, your daily protein intake goes, will cover you, although you can go even higher and potentially see even better gains. But I wouldn't necessarily, given that this question is posed for a 15-year-old, overly stress the nutrition side of things, as long as you're steadily gaining body weight, because it is the training that will be the main stimulus here and the potent stimulus. Even if, let's say you assume you're not cooking by yourself, or you may not have access to high protein meals, even if you're doing your best to have whatever food you have at home or at your school cafeteria, and you are, eating a bit more here and there and seeing the scale go up while doing your best to have some protein source with each meal, it's very unlikely that you're not going to make amazing gains, assuming you're in the gym every week. As far as training frequency, anywhere, like even if you did 2 sessions per week, that would be fine, but I'd recommend being somewhere in the 3 to 5 session mark per week. And a good way to address many of those points would be to just download any free training templates that are out there. You can also check out the SBS training programs, and in general, having some sort of rough template or idea of what you're doing will likely be better than just taking what I said and sort of trying to freestyle it on your own. But that's also fine. Supplements, just to mention, I'm not sure how much you've seen, but besides creatine monohydrate, and I don't know if that's allowed for your age or what's the deal in different countries and jurisdictions, so I'm not going to put myself in any sort of legal risk here. But in general, that aside,
I think it's legal everywhere.
I don't know if it's like if there's a specific age where you can buy supplements. I'm not sure.
Okay.
Maybe, yeah, whatever, better safe than sorry.
Yeah,
but
fair enough.
Regardless, though, my recommendation, even if there's no issue with your age and buying supplements, is that you don't necessarily need any supplements. Do your best to eat mostly whole foods, unprocessed foods. Eat plenty of vegetables and fruits whenever you can, and you are likely going to be more than covered. That's my short-ish TLDR for our listener. I'm glad. I hope you remember me when you're an IFBB pro on stage and say, hey, remember that bald guy on that podcast? Yeah, I didn't listen to any of that. And look at me now, IFBB pro Max Thomas.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. The one thing that I would potentially add is for new lifters in particular. I'm a big fan of bodyweight training and calisthenics. I think it's very helpful just to not just learn how to exert a lot of force with your muscles, but also get a feel and kinesthetic sense for like where your body is in space and how to feel it and control it. I just think that that's a helpful skill to have, where, I do think this is a complete bro science belief, but I do think that just having better kinesthetic sense and kinesthetic awareness will help in the future make other training you do more effective. Just, you have better control over your body, and if you want to like slightly tweak an exercise to target a particular muscle or part of the range of motion or whatever, like, just you'll have a better feel for that, and I can't see why that would be a bad thing. And then too, like, as you're learning, it's not that like free weights or resistance training is like particularly dangerous, because it's not. Like, injury rates are lower than like most other sports or active hobbies that people would have, but like, they exist. Like, they're non-negligible. And I do think that using less external loading early on while you're learning to exercise and push yourself will probably help mitigate some of those risks, at least to some degree. So when I worked at a gym and was training, like, a lot of the young athletes who were signing up, like, these were a lot of like 13, 14-year-old kids who never lifted before, but they were basketball players, football players, like wanted to get under heavy weights and get big and whatnot for their sport. One of the things that I always liked to see was like 20 good, strict bodyweight push-ups before we lay down on the bench, because, like, hey, if your body weight is sufficient enough challenge, there's no reason you need to add external resistance to it. Like, you can get a good workout there. And so, yeah, like, I think that a lot of free weights are great, but I think that you should get really comfortable with things like push-ups, body weight lunges, step-ups. And like, once you can do all of those for, like, you don't have to be able to do them till the cows come home, but like 15, 20 good strict reps, then I do think you will probably have kind of a better body sense, more of a better understanding of the feeling of like pushing yourself, and what like a challenging set should feel like before you add a lot of external load into the picture. So yeah, I agree with all of Pak's recommendations. And I think if you've already been lifting for like a year or whatever, and you're just looking for advice on how to continue improving, completely disregard that. But if you are like, if you're a young kid, or even like in your 20s or 30s, and you've never spent much time in the gym before, like, I do think, I do think it's generally advisable to start off with exercises that don't require much, if any, external loading. Get what you can out of your body weight, and then progress from there to barbell or dumbbell or machine exercises. At least
Beautiful.
for like compound stuff. For like, if you're trying to get jacked, like, don't try to figure out how to do like body weight bicep training. Like, do absolutely grab like dumbbells or hop on machines for curls. But yeah, for things like bench press or like compound lower body exercises, like, see what you can do with body weight stuff first, and then fill in the gaps for like accessory lifts with dumbbells and machines. That's what I would generally recommend.
I think that's really solid. There's not too much to be added. The one thing I'll say is the specific exercises you pick and the specific sets and reps you do, probably don't matter all that much in the grand scheme of things. It's a lot more about finding exercises you enjoy and whatever keeps you in the gym, doing it pretty hard over time, finding a way to make it harder over time, like adding a rep every session, even if it's just an intention to add a rep. That'll go a long way. Same with adding weight. It doesn't need to be the barbell bench press. It can be any variation of chest pressing that you personally enjoy. Don't let yourself be constrained by barbells, machines. Just, especially for muscle growth, do what you enjoy, find something you enjoy, and stick with it. Ultimately, for you to get anywhere in the gym, you need to be doing it for long enough. And the only way you'll keep doing that is if you actually enjoy it. I know it's tempting to always prioritize results over everything else, but there is very much a time and a place to figure out what you enjoy and do that for as long as you enjoy it. And when you don't enjoy it anymore, find another way to do it. You're probably not going to be married to one style of training forever. You're not going to be enjoying one thing forever. But if you're enjoying it right now, just keep doing it for the most part. And then when you don't, switch. And that's the way to stay in the gym for a long time and for long enough for anything, like any of this to even matter in the first place. So yeah, I think we did a pretty good job covering all this. Pak?
Yeah, 100%, man. At the end of the day, fall in love with lifting, and as long as you're not doing anything wild, the rest will come. So definitely echoing Milo.
Absolutely. All right. If there's nothing else, I think that does it for this, the final episode of the main run of the Stronger by Science podcast. Again, don't unsubscribe. There might be a random episode here or there. Just don't expect one 2 weeks from now. But if you do still want audio content on more of a predictable cadence, check out our newsletter, strongerbyscience.com/newsletter, where we will be doing monthly Q&A episodes, much like this one, for newsletter subscribers. So that's it. Thanks to everyone for listening, not just to this episode, but to the 143 episodes prior. We love you. We appreciate you. Good gains, great training, and we'll see you on the other side.
Peace.